Why Cid Kageno is the most OP Isekai protagonist. Let's go, baby. That's what it's all about. Cid Kageno, a truly great protagonist. Someone who I would go as far as to say is a better written character than any of the Velma cast. Yeah, I can't believe I'm binging this show for you guys now.
Out of all the Isekai protagonists we've ever talked about, Cid Kageno might just be the most overpowered
Let's
out of all
go.
of them. That doesn't necessarily mean he's the strongest in terms of overall power, but when it comes to what constitutes an overpowered character, Cid takes it to the limit, then goes even further.
Yeah, I know a thing or two about overpowered characters.
Past it. He has a certain trait that most, if not all, other Isekai protagonists don't even come close to having. And it's that aspect that I feel differentiates him as the most overpowered protagonist in an isekai.
Damn.
So, as I go over what that is using details left out from the novels, hopefully I can convey why it is Cid's overwhelming shows of power are fundamentally different from everyone else's.
They are, because he creates the reality around him. The reality is at his whim. He'll be like, yeah, I revived you because there's this, the cult of Diablos trying to revive the demon god. You know, he says that to Alpha right in the beginning. And Alpha's like, oh my god, no way. And then it turns out that was true. This dude will just make up random crazy plot points for the world he's in. Like, it's a regular world. Aside from him, the world is just a normally operating world. And he'll just say that there's this crazy cult. And, oh, of course this cult is real. Of course he was right. He's always right.
To be overpowered means to overcome with superior strength. It doesn't necessarily have to refer to a person's absolute max potential, but can instead relate to that person's ability to overwhelm someone.
I guess it's about comparing him to the people around him.
When I say that Cid is the most overpowered, I'm not talking about how strong he is relative to other characters from different isekai, but instead the scale at which he overwhelms his opponents in battle. I'm talking about his ability to defeat them in such a one-sided manner that to even call it a battle would be an insult to what truly constitutes one. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking how Ainz and Rimuru tend to do the same, but the core of what makes them so overwhelmingly strong is fundamentally different from what makes Cid so strong. Yes, all three of these characters do have magic and abilities incomparable to anyone else in their universe, but for Ainz and Rimuru, that's just about all they have. They're overpowered because their magic build and stats allow them to be. Take away Ainz's hundreds of spells and his pay-to-win equipment, or Rimuru's ultimate abilities and his innate traits as a slime, and what you're left with are two average salarymen who wouldn't survive in a fight otherwise.
That's such a weird example. He's not overpowered because without his powers he would be strong. This guy lived in a normal world, unlike the other guys who were just killed and then they, or whatever, got trapped in a game, they ended up getting isekai'd. Dude, this guy is in a totally different league. He was trying to break the game before he was in a game. He was in real life, basically training to be Batman, the Eminence in Shadow, the epic darkness. Dude, he's such a beautiful edgelord. It's so nice, right? And he's in this world and he decides, no, I want to break this game. I need magic. He isekais himself. He governs his own fate.
To someone like Cid, though, even without his magic and the equipment that stems from it, his immense knowledge of combat and mastery over every single aspect of it makes him a daunting opponent even before he was isekai'd. He applies this additional element of experience on top of all the other things that the likes of Ainz and Rimuru possess as well. Making for this overpowered character who not only defeats enemies with overwhelming magic, but also with an understanding of combat so refined that even the most experienced fighter could be defeated with feints alone. Now, I don't think that's what makes him overpowered, but I do respect the fact that he also wanted to become the strongest freaking guy in the real world before isekaiing himself right away, so allow me to explain just how in-depth Cid's sense for battle goes. A deeper look into this extra layer of power that's unique to him and ensures his opponents are defeated in the most absolute way possible.
He overpowers people. You know how for the most part there needs to be some sort of challenge or something? The challenge for Cid is not to defeat his opponent. It's to defeat his opponent in a cinematic way. This man thinks he's living like he is this epic shadow Batman character. So he'll act like the NPC in regular day life, and then he'll act like the crazy Batman shadow lord dude in the whenever he fights in the background. But he'll never beat a guy the same way twice. He wants to be the protagonist of his world. The protagonist doesn't beat the same person the same way twice. He'll defeat every opponent he can in the most cinematic way possible. That is just an extra level of disrespect.
Then hopefully after, it's just a little bit of what I'm talking about. Starting all the way back before Cid had isekai'd himself, his passion to become stronger had led him to practice pretty much every form of combat. From karate to boxing and swordplay to mixed martial arts, Cid engrossed himself in any and everything that would make him more powerful. That didn't mean he had become the greatest martial artist in the world, but if he kept training the way he did, then Cid definitely knew it was in the realm of possibility. Fast forward now to when Cid is 10 years old in the New World, and a clear disparity is noticed between his fighting style and the ones more common here. You see, with the ones he'd learned being a refined mix of the best humanity could come up with.
Dude, I love how even when he was fighting those burglars with those kidnappers with the crowbars, he was like giving a speech. The crowbar is a tool far overlooked by most people. Like, of course.
Only natural, the more independent styles of each kingdom seem, well, rough. Since he'd spent years learning a style of fighting where movement was minimized and the best of each combat was combined to create the perfect fight, Cid could easily choose what was best for just about any situation. On the other hand, with this New World's fighting techniques staying within their countries of origin, the different schools of combat haven't yet merged into their optimal versions of themselves. Secret skills and hidden techniques are locked away within the jurisdiction of the country that created them,
Damn,
resulting in the inability for any person to refine and improve on what was taught to them. So, with Cid being in possession of this pre-existing skill set, that already puts him at an advantage over everyone else in the world. Combine that with the existing...
It definitely helps matters, but that's not what makes him overpowered.
...of magic, and that small advantage turns into something completely different. Reason being that magic completely changes the baseline of a person's physical performance. Like, if he can now lift someone up with a single hand via magic, then everything he knows about close quarters combat is completely useless. It'd be like trying to fight a gorilla as a regular human. Say he was pinned in a mounted grapple, then he could simply flex his abs to fly through the air. If his foot was caught during an attack, then a slight activation of his leg muscles would send that person flying. These were just a couple of the many new options that needed to be considered now that magic was added to the...
I find that to be one of the craziest
These
fights,
were just a couple of the many new options that needed to be considered.
This fight right here, him versus this ancient witch lady, bro, insane. He enters this sanctuary that could summon figures from legend that match your power to have like an epic fight. So they summon her, this witch that caused a catastrophe and disaster, and are like, oh my god, she's never been summoned by this before because she's freaking invincible and she would kill anybody. And he still overpowers her completely. And he's like, that was fun. Very fitting that I, the Shadow, will be the one to take you down.
Now that magic was added to the mix. More importantly than that though, the speed and distance at which a person would step into their attacks was completely different and harder to predict now. It was the hardest thing that Cid had to get used to. Since martial arts was all about reading your opponent, knowing their range was of the utmost importance. It meant understanding the angle, position, and distance of their attacks, which in turn allowed him to...
This is an interesting analysis video, I do have to say.
...zone. With those three aspects being everything, as soon as they were understood at its fullest, it didn't matter whether the person attacking was 5 or 100 meters away. Cid could now determine the exact point to stand, which would allow him to both react to an attack and land a blow right after.
My dude is incredibly
It was an optimized
broken.
position defined by a single millimeter. Combine that with an adjustment to the angle of his hits, along with a slight turn to the position of his stance, and those would all be crucial differences, creating advantages for him and disadvantages for his opponent. It was all about creating opportunities through the narrowest of margins, not jumping in 16 feet then dashing 19 back. That was how Cid viewed combat, and he would quickly remaster it even with the addition of magic.
Damn.
Now, that's not to say Cid valued technique over strength, because if he was forced to choose between one or the other, then 10 times out of 10 Cid would always choose strength. Reason being that he firmly believed advanced tactics without the power to back them up was useless.
It's like, Batman, it doesn't matter how much you plan, I am invincible. It's like, but I have prep time!
When confronted with strategies that relied solely on power, speed, or reaction time though, those were the ones that Cid hated the most. They completely disregarded the very subtleties of battle that made them so amazing in the first place. So, as Cid himself likes to put it, strength was natural, but mastery required effort. And it's those words that I believe lie at the core.
Yeah, and that's the wild thing. Most overpowered protagonists, like in Isekai anime, are so incredibly overpowered for no reason. It's like they never even have to try. They don't even have to do the most optimal training styles, but still, they're overpowered anyway. This dude, it's true, he's overpowered to the point that no matter how much training he did, it's irrelevant, but he did train. He trains every day to become as strong as he can, even though he knows he's the strongest reality warping individual ever.
Or what differentiates Cid from every other overpowered isekai protagonist. Sure, Ainz and Rimuru and Hajime may have mastered the use of their own skills and magic, but Cid has mastered all that plus the art of combat. You see, to him,
Plus becoming a nuclear bomb.
skill and expertise are pretty much everything. He allows his techniques to bolster his strength, uses his ingenuity to dictate his speed, then his reaction time allows him to scope out potential attacks. They're all aspects that remain independent from the physicality a lot of the others,
Become
and
the bomb.
though that is definitely important, Cid would never screw up a fight by relying solely on that or any of the other aspects. For example, let's take a look at how he approached his fight with Grease. First, Cid walked forward and waited for Grease to—
He did not take any of this that seriously. He's just being cinematic about it. That's what the level of disrespect it takes to just try to defeat opponents in cinematic ways is hilarious.
As soon as that move was made, not only was Cid made aware of his current range, but that was cue for a minute quantity of magic to be used to speed himself up. He would focus the tiniest bit of magic into his feet, compress it till the time of release, then use its explosive impact to make himself faster.
Damn.
So, while Grease's sword was slicing past a target no longer there, Cid was placing himself within range for his own attacks. A slight shift in position that required minimal effort, yet still—
It's like, yes, I understand. He understands combat very well, but even though he understands combat very well, he's this immortal, all-powerful being.
him with all the advantage. When Cid went to initiate his own attack next, he didn't use magic to make himself faster, as their difference in speed no longer mattered anymore. Since he was now on the offensive, Grease had no choice but to move in response to it, which to Cid indicated he could no longer attack anymore. One more step forward, and Cid would now put both parties in a position too awkward for either to attack, leading Grease to step backward just like how Cid had anticipated. Even if he didn't though, just reading the shift in Grease's magical energy was enough to indicate that he was heading there.
Bruh.
So this time Cid had manipulated by using his own position to affect his opponents, once again creating a clean opportunity for him to strike without any risk to himself. Now, I know Grease really isn't the best opponent to highlight an overwhelming difference in power, but
Every opponent is an overwhelming difference in power. He blocks sword thrusts with the point of his sword!
first instance where we get to see how Cid fights, it sets the foundation for how battle is perceived by him. It isn't just this competition to see who's stronger, but instead a dance of tactics in which one must overcome the other. Grease was definitely stronger than Cid was here, but because Cid understood exactly what was happening—
Did he say Grease is stronger than Cid was here?
Cid was here,
What?
but because Cid understood exactly what was happening, Grease could only feel as if he was getting toyed with.
No
He
shot.
literally felt he was being overpowered.
He was.
Much to the point that he knew he could only wait and accept his death. Now, the battle that truly highlights this fundamental difference to combat is that one-sided fight against the Witch of Calamity.
I love this fight. I'm glad you brought it up.
The literal strongest woman in recorded history, who Cid beat just as easily as he did with everyone else. What makes this fight different from all the others though is that in this one he actually had to try a little bit. Not in the sense of relying more on his magic and his OP abilities, but rather through greater insight into what his opponent was capable of. It's an in-depth analysis that he likes to refer to as a conversation. Whenever Cid finds himself facing a worthy opponent, he likes to treat the battle as this different type of form for it.
Here's the thing. Trying a little bit is an interesting way to put it. I don't even think he needed to try a little bit. Yes, he sees a strong enough opponent that he can have a conversation with, right, in battle. Like a conversation of swordplay. Here's the wild part. Again, he looks at this as his time to shine, as this crazy Eminence and Shadow character. This figure that hunts the shadows from the shadows. The ultimate edgelord needs to have worthy opponents. So he'll fight all the main characters of the world, like all these iconic figures in the world's history. He needs to face them in cool ways. He needs to try because he needs to make it a cinematic moment despite the fact that he's up against someone genuinely powerful.
You see, every little thing from a shift in gaze to the position of the feet were all tells that indicated something about the opponent.
Here was what I was saying earlier in the video. I understand what you're saying, that he has magic prowess and combat prowess. He's not overpowered because of his combat prowess. Yes, he is powerful in combat, he is powerful in magic, but he literally writes the laws of the universe around him. Literally. It's like playing chess, but he has all queens, and his opponent only has pawns.
Tiny cues that each held a very specific meaning to it. So, the more of these little things he observed, the more meanings he could determine from them, and that in turn would lead to figuring out how best to deal with them. It was the very core essence of what fighting was all about to him. Only the most skilled in combat could perceive purpose in the smallest of actions, then use that knowledge to prepare a superior response to it. So, by thinking of it as a conversation, each person's communication skills would be their ability to read their opponent. The stronger your communication skills were, the further ahead you could anticipate, and that in turn would allow you to respond accordingly. If the other person's communication skills were just as strong, then they too could do the same and anticipate prior to your follow-through and then react to it, resulting in this endless back and forth exchange in which the conversation continues until one person's dialogue becomes too much for the other.
I just love that scene. It's just like you see like the twinkling,
conversation
like, twinkle, twinkle,
continues
twinkle, the whole city explodes.
Until one person's dialogue becomes too much for the other. On the other hand, if an opponent's conversational skills were lacking, much like how many of them do, a dialogue would never even get started in the first place. It would just end up in one party acting on impulse until the fight ended, which to Cid couldn't even be considered a conversation.
True.
To him, that was no different than trying to end the fight with a game of rock, paper, scissors. So, whenever Cid was faced with an opponent, every time he would go in trying to start this conversation, but every time until now he would always be met with silence. His opponents would always go in trying to win on impulse, resulting in a far cry from the true type of battle he'd always been yearning for.
See, here's the thing. I don't really think he even yearns for these battles so much. Like, yes, he has fun with the tough battles, but he's not One Punch Man. He's not there yearning for a tough battle. That's not his arc.
When he does have the chance to have this conversation, though, that's when we get to see just how far this gap in skill and experience truly takes it.
That's a good line, to be honest, because it's only the most powerful woman in recorded history that we got to see how overpowered he is. He's so far out of the realm of existence of everyone else. He doesn't overpower them even with his skills. Like, it's not like he doesn't have to try. They're not even in the same realm as him.
So, first he starts with observation. Initially by simply staring to find those first subtle meanings, then following it up by granting the initiative to judge speed, mobility, and destructive capacity.
These waifus are freaking hot, not gonna lie. I mean, that is the show. I mean, this dude, he is the ultimate main character. That is his character arc, becoming the ultimate main character. Being able to play the NPC during the day and the epic Batman Shadow Lord at night, and with the harem, obviously, that comes with the territory. His character arc is surpassing the main character role.
Capacity. It's a step that usually takes less time the stronger your communication skills were. Once that observation was complete, the next step was to refine his movements, and this typically involved removing unnecessary motion when dodging. Like, if he could turn full steps into half steps and 2 moves into 1, then that would directly result in a window in which a counterattack could be made. You see, the less time spent moving to dodge meant more time for a counterattack, bringing us to the third step in which the first 2 were creating an opening for. Sure, Cid.
See, I think the reason why he does this to counterattack is because that makes a fight interesting. No one wants to watch a fight where the main character walks in, he's overpowered, he just overpowers his enemy. It's always about the enemy saying, "Ha! This is only 1/10 of my power. I will now unlock everything and I will destroy you." And then he blocks it, then he counterattacks. That makes for an interesting fight. Like, at least from some observer, that fight would be more interesting than him just walking and obliterating them. That's why he lets them even get to the counterattack.
It could have evaded Aurora forever, but doing that would never lead to victory. No. His dodges needed to be refined so that he could create space for a counterattack.
It's not that he needs the dodges to be refined to create space for a counterattack. He loves the drama of the fight. He needs the dodges to be refined and stuff to make the fight more dramatic.
And that was the essence of the conversation he was having. It was actually noted perfectly through the observations of Alexia. She was the first to understand exactly what Shadow was doing here. Now, for someone as skilled as Cid, the outcome of this battle was made certain all the way back at step 1. His initial observations showed Aurora wasn't as skilled at communicating as him. So, by the time the first move was even made, both seemed to understand it was only a matter of time until the battle would be decided by him. Now, despite it being so one-sided, I believe this to be the best fight that highlights that fundamental difference I've been talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, Cid
I'm glad
definitely
you
could have
brought
used
this one
any
up.
number of his OP abilities.
Dude, he could have nuked her on the spot, but it's about the theatric. He has to play that main character role. In order for him to play that role and keep the theatrics going, he needed to do it this way.
This right away, but
What
that's never the type of fight that
What
he's
a
trying
coolly written character,
to
for
go
sure.
for. Unlike what Ainz, Rimuru, or anyone else does, Cid is always going in trying to start this conversation. He wants to begin this dialogue so he can beat his opponent in the most absolute way possible. Achieving that perfect victory is all that ever matters to him. Victory to everyone else just means—
Yeah, exactly. He wants that perfect victory. Obviously, he's gonna win, but he wants the perfect victory.
beating your opponent, but victory to Cid is something completely different. It's the process of systematically dismantling them in the most overwhelming way possible. A precise operation that always ends with him overpowering them both in strength and technique. Whereas every other isekai protagonist wins their battles through strength and power, Cid takes it a step above and bolsters all that with technique and ingenuity. He would never
Emphasis on ingenuity.
solely rely on the magic or skills that came from being isekai'd. No, instead he chooses to rely on himself. His refined experience with combat, which results in this level of overpowering that we only ever see from him. Thus the reason I think Cid to be the most OP character out of all of them.
I don't know. I don't think that's why he's the most OP character. I get the point. You make good arguments, and his fighting style is freaking awesome, but I don't think that's why he's the most overpowered isekai protagonist. I think he's the most overpowered isekai protagonist because he's literally rewriting the reality of his own world at will.
Again, that doesn't mean he's the strongest, but when it comes to the scale at which he overwhelms his opponent, every other protagonist doesn't even come close. There's no one else who achieves absolute victory and inflicts such hopeless defeat like the way that Cid does. I mean, the guy literally beat the hero Olivier without so much as a sword or magic. He beat Anna Rose with perfect spacing and terrifying foresight, then humiliated Iris through a series of feints so intimidating she couldn't even move. Now, if that doesn't highlight that fundamental gap in combat experience, then I honestly don't know what else to tell you. It's his literal life passion to be the most overpowered. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on what I think of Cid.
Abyss Reader in chat says, I think I understand why he's the most OP. It's because our MC doesn't do what everyone else does, which is use all their power to dictate the course of the battle. Our MC uses the absolute least of his ability to win every single battle without even truly a flawed method to accomplish this. I think that's a good point. Dude uses the absolute lowest level of his power possible to just barely, completely overpower his opponent. He's never gonna make it a close fight. He'll always overpower him, but he'll overpower— See, I don't even know about that. The guy dropped a nuke on some idiot with a sword. Like, he keeps it interesting. He always gives his opponents a chance. Here's the thing, like, he'll give his opponents a chance. He'll show what they can do. Why? Because they're really strong, and whoever person can actually overpower a guy like this, they must be insane. And then he'll overpower them. He wants his opponent to show off everything, because when someone that has all that skill gets overpowered, it's a much bigger flex.
Happen to think the same or not, I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments. This was honestly just a fun little topic that I wanted to talk about. Nothing that needs to be taken too seriously, I hope. But with this now—
That was a great video. Thank you, AniNews. That was fun. And it was a great discussion springboard. Like, subscribe, and follow me on Twitch. Stay weird, fam.